The aluminum kneeboard struck the emergency table with a flat metallic sound, and Major General Daniel Mercer stopped moving. Several nearby conversations stopped with him. His eyes went directly to the 3 black lines crossing its lower corner. The marks had faded over the years, but they were still there. His right thumb moved across his wedding ring, once. Twice, then he stepped closer. The room had been warm a moment earlier, full of soft voices and the faint clink of glasses. Now I could hear the ventilation system moving through the old rotor blades suspended above us. One of them trembled on its cable, metal against metal. "Who drew those marks?" he asked. I kept my hands at my sides. My father answered for me, "Probably some surplus dealer." Mercer did not look at him, he looked directly at me. "Where did you get this kneeboard?" I had spent 12 years imagining what I would say if anyone ever asked the right question. In the end, I said nothing, because the truth had never frightened me as much as what people did with it. 6 hours earlier, the kneeboard had been wrapped in one of my mother's old kitchen towels. Yellow cotton, blue flowers, a brown stain near one corner from a Thanksgiving gravy boat she dropped when I was 14. I found it at the bottom of a cedar chest in my apartment, beneath 2 winter blankets and a cardboard box full of photographs I rarely opened. The aluminum felt colder than the room. One edge had burned dark enough to leave a permanent curve in the metal. The elastic strap had hardened with age. Fine grains of pale sand still lived inside the seam, though I had cleaned the surface more times than I could count. I unfolded the towel slowly. My mother's handwriting sat in the upper corner. "Come home when you can." She had written it with a black marker before my final deployment, when the kneeboard was still clean, and the world still seemed willing to return things in the condition you gave them. My phone rang on the kitchen counter, Dr. Lena Ortiz. I let it ring twice before answering. "Evie, I am here." "I wanted to make sure you were still coming." I looked at the kneeboard. "I said I would. You said you would consider it." "That is how I say yes when I do not want anyone to sound relieved." She exhaled softly. Lena had the careful voice of someone who spent her life handling objects that could not defend themselves from other people's stories. "The archive received the final release this morning," she said. "Not everything. Names are still redacted in 2 sections. But we have enough to authenticate the aircraft wreck record and the chain of custody. I am not donating it, I know. I am not loaning it for the gala." "I know that too. Then why does it need to be there tonight?" A pause. "Because the board votes tonight on the new medical aviation exhibit. Your father reviewed the preliminary catalog photographs and submitted an alternate provenance statement for several artifacts." My fingers tightened around the edge of the towel. "What kind of alternate statement?" "He believes the kneeboard may have belonged to a training crew connected to his command." I closed my eyes. My father had never seen the kneeboard before. He had seen photographs of me in flight gear. He had watched me receive my wings. He had once stood beside a helicopter at Fort Rucker and explained my own pre-flight induction to a visiting congressman. But he had never asked what I carried in Afghanistan. "Did you tell him he was wrong?" I told him provenance is not inherited through family reputation. That sounded exactly like Lena. "What time?" 5:30. "Before the guests arrive, I will be there." After the call ended, I remained at the kitchen table with the towel open in front of me. Outside, the first thin snow of the season drifted past the window. It melted as soon as it touched the balcony rail. I pressed my thumb against the upper right corner of the kneeboard. A habit. During flight, that corner held the emergency frequencies. Before every mission, I checked it even when I already knew every number. My body still expected to find them there. The phone rang again. This time the screen showed Dad. I nearly let it go to voicemail. Then I remembered Lena's words. Alternate provenance statement. I answered Evelyn. He was the only person who used my full name as if it were an accusation. "Dad, tell me you are not wearing that gray civilian suit tonight." "I had not decided. You are wearing your dress uniform." "I am retired. You are still entitled to wear it at an appropriate ceremonial event." "I know what I am entitled to do." He ignored that. "The photographers will be there at 6:45. Mercer arrives at 7. The board vote happens after dinner. We need one strong family photograph before the room fills." "We the foundation." "That is not what you said." He made the small, impatient sound he had used throughout my childhood, whenever I noticed the difference between his words and his meaning. "This exhibit is about the Carter family's commitment to Army aviation." "No," I said, "it is about medical crews, which is precisely why your presence matters." Your mother would have understood. The sentence landed softly. My thumb stopped against the metal. My father rarely used my mother's memory directly. He preferred implication, a raised eyebrow near her photograph. A sigh before saying she had always known how to keep peace. Tonight he needed my uniform, so he brought her into the room. What exactly do you want me to do? I asked. Stand with me. Smile. Do not disappear into the archive halfway through the program. And for once, let people see that you are proud to be part of this family. I looked down at the words on the metal. Come home when you can. I will be there before 5:30, in uniform. I ended the call. For a moment, the apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator motor and the soft ticking of sleet against the glass. Then I folded the yellow towel around the kneeboard again. My father thought silence meant agreement. He had built half our relationship on that mistake. The other half was built on the things he had never asked. I had not worn the uniform in 3 years. The jacket still fit across my shoulders, though the fabric felt less forgiving than I remembered. An old compression ache settled at the base of my spine, the kind years of cockpit vibration and body armor had left behind. Cold weather always found it before I did. The ache never stopped me. It simply announced every cold front before the weather report did. I laid my ribbons on the bedroom dresser and removed 2 that were optional for the evening. Not because I was ashamed of them, because my father noticed decorations before he noticed people. I pinned my wings above the left pocket and stopped there. The woman in the mirror looked composed. That was the word people used when they wanted to compliment a person for not making them uncomfortable. Composed, disciplined, strong. No one ever asked what those words cost to maintain. I slipped the wrapped kneeboard into a plain canvas document bag and drove north through wet snow. The Front Range Aviation Museum occupied an old military hangar that had been rebuilt around its original steel frame. By daylight it looked industrial. At night, with the glass entrance glowing and the aircraft lit from below, it looked almost sacred. My father liked sacred places. They made applause sound more important. I arrived before the valet service opened and parked near the staff entrance. A maintenance worker was salting the walkway. He nodded at my uniform but did not stare. Inside, the museum was still between identities. Catering carts moved beneath a suspended medevac helicopter. Staff members taped black power cables to the floor. Someone tested a microphone and produced a brief low howl through the speakers. Above the main gallery, 3 restored rotor blades shifted in the conditioned air. A faint scrape moved through the ceiling. I stopped without meaning to. The sound was harmless, a cable under tension, metal expanding as the building warmed. My body did not care. The old ache at the base of my spine tightened beneath the jacket. For half a second I smelled hydraulic fluid, then Lena called my name. She came toward me carrying a small examination light and a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Her dark hair was pulled into a knot that had already started to loosen. You came in uniform. My father is persuasive. That is a generous word. It is the word he uses. She looked at the canvas bag. May I? I carried it to the archive room myself. The room sat behind 2 security doors and had no windows. White tables stood beneath adjustable lights. The air smelled faintly of paper, cotton gloves, and the wax used to protect old wood. I placed the bag on the table and removed the yellow towel. Lena did not reach for the kneeboard immediately. Your mother wrapped it? She wrapped everything in kitchen towels, glassware. Picture frames. Once she wrapped a toaster before we moved houses. Did the toaster survive? The toaster did. My father's golf trophies did not. Lena smiled, then put on a pair of gloves. She examined the burned edge first. This oxidation pattern is consistent with heat exposure after surface abrasion, she said. Not a warehouse fire, more likely an equipment compartment or cockpit event. I watched the beam of her light move over the metal. She found the 3 black lines, grease pencil, yes. Different from the coordinates, yes. You know who made them? I looked toward the closed door. I know why they were made. She waited. When I did not continue, she shifted to the serial plate. A museum does not authenticate an object because someone tells a convincing story, she said. We establish material, chain of custody, and independent record. Stories come last. That must make galas difficult. It makes fathers difficult. The door opened before I could answer. My father entered without knocking. He wore a dark blue dinner jacket with a miniature ribbon rack and a foundation pin at the lapel. At 69, he still carried himself like a man walking toward a formation that had been waiting for him. His eyes moved first to my uniform, approval, then to the kneeboard. Confusion, finally to Lena's gloves, possession. "What is that doing here?" he asked. "Being examined," Lena said. "For the exhibit? For authentication." He stepped closer. I saw the moment he recognized my mother's handwriting. His gaze paused on it, then moved away too quickly. "Sarah wrote on every piece of equipment Evelyn dragged home," he said. "She had a sentimental streak. It was written before deployment," I said. He gave me a brief glance. "Then it cannot have much relevance to the current exhibit." Lena turned the kneeboard a few degrees beneath the light. "That depends on its provenance." My father leaned closer but did not touch it. "This is exactly the problem with modern military museums," he said. "Too much attention on damaged personal objects. People come to see aircraft, doctrine, leadership. They want history, not grief arranged behind glass." Lena removed her gloves. "History is usually grief after the people with microphones finish editing it." My father smiled as if she had made a charming joke. I submitted the training command possibility because I recognized the configuration. "You recognize a standard kneeboard," I said. "I recognize what belonged to my aviation community." The words were small, almost reasonable. That was how my father claimed things. Not by taking them from your hands, by placing them inside a larger story where he stood at the center. He looked at the canvas bag. "You should leave that here and join me in the gallery. The Mercer photograph has been moved earlier. I have not agreed to loan it." His jaw tightened. "Evelyn, tonight is not the time to become territorial over scrap metal." Lena placed the yellow towel over the kneeboard. The gesture was gentle, but it ended the discussion. "My office will contact you after authentication," she said. "Until then, Colonel Carter, the object remains Miss Carter's property." He disliked being reminded that rank did not cross every doorway. "Of course," he said, "we are all on the same side." He turned to me. "Do something about your hair before guests arrive." Then he left. The archive door closed behind him. Lena looked at me. "You did not tell him?" "No." "Why?" "Because my father had been giving speeches about courage since before I learned to drive. Because he had attended my flight school graduation and explained to everyone that warrant officers flew while commissioned officers led. Because after my mother died, he asked why I had chosen a routine transport mission over being with her. Because correcting him would have required speaking about a night I could barely survive, remembering. I said none of that. I thought he would ask eventually. Lena folded the towel back, and when he did not, I got used to the version he preferred. We completed the initial inspection in silence. She documented the serial plate and photographed the burn pattern. When she tried to remove a small grain of sand from the stitched edge, I put out my hand. "Leave that one." She paused. "All right." I did not know why that particular grain mattered. There had been an entire valley of sand, but memory does not preserve scale. It chooses one useless thing and makes it sacred. By 6:30, the museum had changed. The work lights dimmed. Music drifted through the gallery. Waiters carried trays between restored aircraft. Men who had once worn flight suits now wore tailored jackets and spoke about deployments in carefully shortened stories. My father stood beneath the suspended medevac helicopter, greeting donors. When he saw me, he waved me over, not like a father. Like a stage manager correcting a missed cue, a couple stood beside him. The man wore a defense company badge. The woman held a champagne glass with both hands. "My daughter Evelyn," my father said. "She served around rotary wing units." Around, the word was deliberate. The man looked at my wings. "You flew?" Before I could answer, my father chuckled. "Mostly support work, important of course. Every organization needs dependable people moving equipment and schedules." The woman glanced at him, then back at me. "What aircraft?" "Black Hawks," I said. My father placed a hand against my elbow. "She is modest about how ordinary most of it was." His fingers pressed once, a warning disguised as affection. I could have corrected him. Instead, I looked past the couple toward the archive corridor. Lena was standing near the doorway with Helen Price, the board chair. Helen carried 2 sealed envelopes, one cream, one blue. My father followed my gaze. His expression brightened. "The cream envelope is the naming resolution," he said. "By the end of tonight, this place will finally have a Carter Aviation Legacy Gallery. And the blue one," his smile thinned, "a procedural alternative. It will not be needed." Helen noticed us watching and placed both envelopes inside a leather portfolio. My father's thumb dragged once across the edge of his foundation pin. He checked his watch. Then the entrance doors opened and Major General Daniel Mercer walked into the museum. My father's posture changed instantly. The room had found the man he intended to use as proof. Daniel Mercer was shorter than he appeared in photographs. That was my first thought. My second was that he walked like his right knee hurt. He entered with his wife, paused to speak to the maintenance worker near the door, and then waited while she removed snow from the shoulder of his coat. My father crossed the gallery before anyone else could reach him. Dan. They embraced with the controlled warmth of men who had spent decades standing beside each other in official photographs. Mercer's eyes moved through the room. They passed over me once without stopping. My shoulders stayed tight beneath the jacket. My father brought him toward the donors. Before dinner, I want you to meet Evelyn. He said my name with greater pride now that Mercer could hear it. This is my daughter. She followed me into Army aviation. Mercer shook my hand. His grip was firm but careful. Pilot, yes sir. Do not call me sir tonight. She flew support missions, my father added, then moved into civilian training. Sensible work. Mercer's thumb rotated across his wedding ring. A narrow scar crossed the skin beneath it. What unit? He asked. I gave him the unit designation. His eyes remained on mine for half a second longer than courtesy required. Then a Foundation officer approached and pulled him toward the press line. My father exhaled. You do not need to give everyone your full resume. I answered one question. You know how these rooms work. People hear combat unit and start inventing stories. That would be terrible. He looked at me sharply. I had inherited my mother's talent for saying the polite version of an impolite thought. It was one of the few things my father never managed to train out of me. Dinner was served beneath the wings of a restored transport aircraft. I sat at the Carter family table between an empty chair reserved in my mother's memory and a donor who spent most of the meal explaining why civilian helicopter pilots were more practical than military ones. Across the room, Mercer listened to my father's stories. Richard Carter had always been an excellent speaker. He knew how to let silence gather before a punchline. He remembered spouses' names. He made every listener feel briefly included in a history larger than themselves. That ability was real, so were his years of service. Nothing about the truth of my father's accomplishment required him to reduce mine. My fork rested untouched beside the plate. Across the room, my father widened his smile and drew another donor into the story. Insecurity looked like command presence on him. During dessert, Helen Price stepped to the podium. She welcomed the donors and described the museum's plans for the new medical aviation gallery. She spoke about evacuation crews, maintenance teams, flight medics, and the people who flew into places most aircraft were trying to leave. My father listened with a pleasant expression until she said the board was considering a collective naming model. His hand stopped beside his water glass. The cream envelope waited inside Helen's portfolio. So did the blue one. After Helen finished, my father rose to introduce Mercer. He did not use notes. General Mercer represents the finest tradition of American Army aviation, he began. Leadership under pressure, courage without complaint. The certainty that when a mission requires real pilots, real soldiers, and real judgment, trained professionals answer. Applause moved through the room. I looked at the rotor blades above us. A cable shifted. Metal whispered. My father told a story about Mercer coordinating a rescue operation during a deployment. The story was accurate in its broad shape and polished in every detail that placed senior leadership near the center. Then he turned toward me. Army aviation has room for many kinds of service, he said. Not everyone is asked to command in crisis. Some coordinate. Some carry paperwork. Some make sure the right people reach the aircraft at the right time. A few guests looked in my direction. My father smiled. My daughter Evelyn has always represented that quieter support tradition. The donor beside me leaned back slightly, not away from me. Away from the discomfort, my father continued. As a young woman, she imagined flying would make her fearless. The Army wisely found places where her attention to detail could still be useful. My pulse remained even. Under the table, my left heel pressed into the floor until the polished leather of my shoe creased. My father raised one hand toward the suspended medevac helicopter. She looked impressive in a flight suit. Her mother used to say Evie could walk into a room looking like she had just stepped out of a recruiting poster. He waited. The audience gave him a small, uncertain laugh. Then he delivered the line he had probably prepared in advance. Between us, she was always more flight attendant than pilot. A flight attendant in the wrong uniform. This time fewer people laughed. The sound arrived unevenly and died quickly. Mercer did not smile. Lena was standing near the archive corridor with both arms folded. Helen Price looked down at her portfolio. My father mistook their silence for permission. He went further. That may sound harsh, but families owe each other honesty. Evelyn has spent years avoiding events like this because she has never been comfortable beside people who carried the real weight. The water glass in front of me reflected the lights above. I could see my mother's empty chair and the curved surface. My father shifted from humor into solemnity. Even when Sarah became ill, Evelyn chose duty over family. She missed the final hours because of what she later described as a routine transport assignment. The room changed, not dramatically, no one gasped. A waiter near the wall lowered a tray by 2 inches. Mercer's wife turned her face toward him. Lena took 1 step forward. I felt the old pressure behind my teeth. Copper, I had bitten the inside of my cheek. My father looked at me as if expecting tears, anger, or surrender. Any of those would have allowed him to become the reasonable one. I folded my napkin once, then I stood. My chair moved softly across the floor. I need to collect something from the archive, I said. He smiled with visible relief. Of course, he believed I was retreating. For most of my life, my father had mistaken my refusal to fight in public for an inability to fight at all. I walked away from the table. Lena met me at the archive door. You do not have to go back in there, she said. I know. Then what are you doing? Taking the kneeboard home. Her eyes searched my face. Authentication is not finished. It is finished enough for me. Inside the archive room, the yellow towel lay folded beside the object. I placed the kneeboard into the canvas bag. My hand paused over the 3 marks. Mercer's wedding ring, the scar beneath it, I had seen both before. Not his face, not clearly. That night, every face had been covered in dust, blood, or oxygen equipment. But I remembered a hand reaching between the seats after the landing. A wedding ring caught against a torn restraint. 3 black marks drawn by a finger that would not stop shaking. Behind me, the archive door opened. My father stood there. You are leaving before the vote? Yes. This performance is exactly what I was trying to prevent. I lifted the bag. I have not performed anything. You stood up in the middle of my remarks. You discussed Mom's death in front of 200 people. You made it relevant when you failed to come home. The sentence was quieter than the speech. He did not look toward the audience when he said it. I looked at him. For years I had imagined correcting every detail. I had pictured dates, flight logs, casualty numbers. I had pictured laying proof across his desk until he could no longer avoid understanding. But facts cannot enter a person who is using ignorance as shelter. What was the name of the valley? I asked. He frowned. What, the routine transport mission? What valley was it in? I do not remember every place you flew. What aircraft number? That is not the point. How many people were on board? His face hardened. Do not interrogate me. I nodded once. You are right. Questions are uncomfortable when you have spent 12 years answering them for yourself. I moved past him. He did not follow immediately. When I returned to the gallery, Mercer was standing near the display table where Lena had placed her examination light. He saw the canvas bag. Something in his expression shifted. My father came behind me, speaking too loudly. Evelyn has decided to take her little souvenir home before anyone can properly examine it. Mercer looked at the bag. What souvenir? My father reached for the zipper. I moved the bag away from him. The yellow towel slipped free. The kneeboard struck the table with a flat metallic sound. Several nearby conversations stopped. Mercer's eyes went directly to the 3 black lines. His thumb found his wedding ring. Once, twice, he stepped closer. That was the moment from the beginning. The moment the room stopped belonging to my father. Who drew those marks? Mercer asked. My father laughed. Probably some surplus dealer. Mercer did not look at him. He looked at me. Where did you get this kneeboard? The 3 lines were only grease pencil. Nothing heroic about them. Nothing cinematic. They had been drawn to identify 3 people who would die first if we did not reach surgical care. I opened my mouth. My father answered before I could speak. She collects military junk. It helps her feel involved. Mercer's hand dropped from his ring. No, he said. 1 word, softly spoken. My father's smile remained in place, but his eyes narrowed. Mercer pointed at the lower corner. I made those marks. The ventilation system moved through the suspended rotor blades. Metal whispered above us. No one in the room seemed to breathe. My father recovered first. He had spent a lifetime recovering in front of audiences. Dan, you have marked 1,000 pieces of equipment. Not like this. Mercer moved closer to the table. His index finger hovered above the kneeboard without touching it. 3 patients, he said, 1 mark for each casualty who would not survive the delay if we diverted south. A murmur moved through the people nearest us. My father adjusted his jacket. You are describing a common triage notation. Mercer finally looked at him. I was the patient in the middle. The room narrowed. Mercer's wife placed one hand against his back. He continued, but his voice had lost the smooth public tone from the stage. Our aircraft took fire before pickup. We transferred to the medevac bird near the eastern ridge. 20 minutes later, the primary hydraulic system started failing. My father shook his head. That was the dust line incident. Mercer looked at the kneeboard again. Yes, the name moved through the room. I had not heard it spoken aloud in years. Dustline was not the mission name. It was what people called the incident later, after an initial report used the phrase dustline approaching from the west. The phrase became a label. Labels make events easier to file. Not easier to survive. Lena stepped forward with her clipboard. General Mercer, I need to be clear. Are you stating that you personally saw this object aboard the aircraft involved in that incident? Before or after landing? Both. Can you identify any feature besides the markings? He closed his eyes briefly. The upper right corner was bent inward. The pilot kept pressing it with her thumb. My hand moved before I could stop it. My thumb touched the upper right edge. Mercer saw. So did Lena. My father did not. He was looking at the audience, measuring the room. Lena put on gloves. The serial plate is consistent with the aviation set assigned to the unit, she said. The oxidation pattern also matches heat damage described in the recovered equipment inventory. My father turned toward her. You said authentication was incomplete. It was, and now we have a first-hand witness with a documented presence on the aircraft. You have a memory from a wounded man under stress. Mercer's wife inhaled sharply. Mercer raised one hand before she could speak. He is right about one thing, he said. Memory is not enough. My father seized the opening. Exactly, Lena nodded. That is why we do not stop at memory. She looked toward Helen Price. Helen opened her leather portfolio. The blue envelope remained inside. She removed a smaller archival authorization form. The board received notice this afternoon that a portion of the Dustline cockpit audio had been cleared for educational use, Helen said. The recording was scheduled for review after the vote. My father's face changed, only slightly. The muscles near his mouth tightened. Scheduled by whom? The Archive Committee. I chair the foundation. You do not chair the Archive Committee. Helen's voice was calm. My father's jaw flexed once. His hand flattened against the table, then lifted when he noticed the room watching. He turned to me. Did you arrange this? No. It was the first answer I had given him all evening that he believed immediately. Because he could not imagine me arranging anything that would place me at the center. Lena connected a museum tablet to the sound system. General Mercer, before we play anything, I need your consent as an identifiable survivor. He looked at his wife. She nodded. You have it. Helen addressed the nearest guests. This is not part of the evening's entertainment. Anyone who prefers to step away may do so. No one moved. A woman near the aisle gathered her coat against her chest, then let it fall back across her chair. Lena pressed the screen. At first there was only static. Then rotor noise. A clipped voice called pressure readings. Another voice asked about visibility. I felt the muscles in my back lock. The museum disappeared, not completely. The lights remained. The floor remained. My father stood 6 feet away. But the sound opened a second room inside the first. Dust hammered the windscreen. The controls pulled against my hands. Someone behind me was praying without words. The recording continued. A male voice said, "Primary is falling through the lower limit." Then my voice answered, "Do not chase the needle, hold the input. Give me the next reading." It sounded younger than I remembered. Not afraid. That was what people would hear. They would not hear how hard I was pressing my left heel into the floor to stop my leg from shaking. The recording crackled. "Brownout building, keep the clock running. We have no visual, we do not need the whole ground. Give me one fixed point." My father stared at the speaker. His mouth opened, then closed. His gaze shifted from the speaker to me. The voice continued, "We only need the aircraft to stay alive 30 more seconds." A child somewhere in the gallery began to cry and was quickly carried toward the lobby. The recording ended after 11 seconds of static. No landing, no applause, just an abrupt silence. Lena lowered the volume. Mercer's wedding ring stopped moving beneath his thumb. That was her, he said. He did not point at me. He did not need to. My father looked from Mercer to the kneeboard, then to the wings above my pocket. You cannot identify a person from a few sentences after 12 years. Mercer's face remained still. I heard that voice through my headset while the aircraft dropped sideways into the dust. That is not identification. No, Helen said, the roster is. She removed a set of papers from the portfolio. My father took one step toward her. Those records remain restricted. Sections remain redacted. The flight crew names attached to the Valor Review were released. He looked at me then, really looked, not at the uniform. Not at the ribbons, at me. His eyes held mine for one breath. Then they moved toward the donors, counting faces before they returned to me. This is clearly a misunderstanding, he said. Evelyn may have been aboard the aircraft in a support capacity. Mercer's wife spoke for the first time. My husband said she was the pilot. My father smiled at her with strained patience. Wounded passengers often use the word pilot for anyone in the cockpit. Mercer's shoulders shifted, the hand beside his leg closed once, then opened. I was not confused about the person keeping us in the air. Lena turned the kneeboard beneath the light. The serial assignment places this equipment at the right seat station. My father said nothing. I could see the shape of his next defense forming. Even before he spoke, I knew it, family ownership. If he could not deny the achievement, he would absorb it. He placed one hand against the table. Well, he said, giving the room a careful breath of a laugh, it appears Evelyn inherited more Carter instinct than she ever admitted. There it was. Mercer looked at him. My father continued, growing more confident. I always knew the training was in her. From childhood, I taught her to remain calm, to read the room, to trust procedure. I watched him build a new version of the story in real time. In this version, he had not mocked me, he had challenged me. He had not ignored my service, he had prepared me for it. His public smile returned. This is what legacy means. One generation passes discipline to the next. The room gave him nothing. But he no longer needed agreement, he needed momentum. He turned toward the podium. Helen, perhaps this discovery strengthens the original naming resolution. The Carter Aviation Legacy Gallery can now represent 2 generations. Sit down, Richard. Mercer's voice was quiet. My father stopped. I had never heard anyone speak to him that way in public. Neither had he. Mercer stepped between him and the podium. You did not train the pilot who brought us down. My father's eyes narrowed. You cannot know that. I asked her about her training while we waited for extraction. A brief image moved behind my eyes, Mercer lying on the ground with oxygen tubing beneath his nose. His hand still caught in a damaged restraint, me kneeling beside him because the medic had moved to another casualty. He had asked where I learned to hold an aircraft that way. I told him the names of 2 instructor pilots, not my father. Mercer looked toward the audience. She named Chief Warrant Officer Marlene Brooks and Captain Ray Holloway. She spoke about her crew. She did not mention Colonel Carter. My father's face went still. That reaction was different from shock. It was calculation failing. Helen unfolded the release citation. She did not begin reading immediately. She looked at me. Miss Carter, the board will not proceed without your consent. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I had spent years avoiding this exact arrangement. A crowd waiting, a document ready, my name's sitting inside someone else's mouth. I looked at the kneeboard. The words in my mother's handwriting were partly hidden beneath Lena's gloved hand. Come home when you can. I thought of the people on that aircraft. The medic who used his own body to hold a patient against the floor. The crew chief who kept calling pressure numbers after blood filled one eye. The co-pilot who held the controls when my hands briefly stopped obeying me. The man who died after we landed, despite everything. The story was not mine alone. That had always been true. But my father had used that truth to justify pretending none of it belonged to me. You may read it, I said. Helen lowered her eyes to the page. The museum seemed to lean toward her. Chief Warrant Officer Evelyn Carter maintained command of the aircraft following progressive hydraulic failure during reduced visibility and active threat conditions. My father's eyes closed once, Helen continued. She rejected a diversion that would have delayed surgical care, selected an unmarked landing area using partial visual references and crew coordination, and remained aboard until all surviving passengers and crew were removed. Mercer's wife began to cry silently. Her actions directly contributed to the survival of 11 personnel. 11, not 12, the number always sat between gratitude and failure. People heard 11 and thought it meant everyone. It did not. Helen finished the citation. No one applauded. My shoulders lowered by a fraction. No applause rose to turn the moment into a performance. Mercer crossed the small distance between us. He did not salute. He did not call me a hero. He held out his hand. I never knew your name. I took it. You were not supposed to remember mine. I remembered your voice, his wedding ring pressed against my fingers. The scar beneath it had come from the torn restraint. My father stood beside the stage, separated from us by less than 10 feet and more than a decade. He looked older than he had during dinner. Then he looked toward the empty chair at our table. My mother's chair. His gaze moved from the citation date to my mother's empty chair and stayed there. When did this happen? He asked. No one answered immediately. Helen looked down at the date printed on the citation. Then she read it aloud. My father's mouth opened. The date was the night my mother died. My father sat down, not in the chair reserved for him near the podium. In the nearest empty seat, the chair belonged to a museum volunteer who had stood when the recording began. My father lowered himself without checking whose place he was taking. His hands rested on his knees. When? He asked again. Helen repeated the date. He looked at me. Your mother went into surgery that afternoon. I know. You told me you were delayed by a transport assignment. I was. His eyes moved toward the kneeboard. That was the transport? Yes, the word seemed too small for the distance it crossed. My father stood again. No, you called from Bagram the next morning. I called from a field surgical site. You said the mission ran long. It did. You never said anything about hydraulic failure. No, why? The question might have mattered 12 years earlier. Now it arrived after a public speech, after the joke, after he had used my mother's death as proof of my selfishness. Still, part of me wanted to answer. My mouth opened before I had chosen the words. For one breath, I was back in the kitchen, after the funeral, waiting for him to ask a different question. I could not talk about the details, I said, not then. Later you had already decided what happened. He shook his head. I asked why you were not there. You asked why I chose not to be there. You could have corrected me. I tried once. He frowned. I remembered the kitchen after the funeral. My father standing beside the sink, still wearing the white shirt from the memorial service. A glass untouched near his hand. I said there'd been an aircraft incident. He asked whether I was injured. I said no. He said then it could not have been serious enough to miss my mother's final hours. After that I stopped. You said there had been a maintenance issue, he replied. I said the aircraft nearly went down. I thought you were exaggerating because you felt guilty. The pressure behind my teeth returned. I tasted copper again. He had heard the truth. He had simply selected the version that protected his judgment. Mercer moved away, giving us space without leaving the room. Lena lowered the examination light. Around us, guests watched with the uneasy stillness of people who had expected a ceremony and found themselves inside a family wound. My father glanced at them. We should discuss this privately. You discussed it publicly. His gaze returned to me. The old command tone entered his voice. Evelyn. I used to respond to that tone before I processed the words. Stand straighter, speak clearly, do not embarrass him. Tonight my body heard it, but the order did not travel any farther. Helen Price stepped toward the podium. The board still has business to complete. My father turned. Not now. The naming vote was scheduled for tonight. You cannot possibly proceed after an event like this. This event is exactly why we must proceed carefully. She opened her portfolio. My father looked at the cream envelope. His hand moved toward the cream envelope before Helen touched it. He believed the discovery might still rescue him, a decorated daughter. A general saved, a family legacy enlarged rather than threatened. He moved toward the stage. Helen, as I said, tonight's revelation only strengthens the Carter contribution to Army aviation. Evie Carter, Richard Carter, 2 generations beneath one polished brass plaque. He could already see it. I could see him seeing it. Helen removed the cream envelope and placed it on the podium. Then she removed the blue one. The original proposal named the gallery for a single foundation patron, she said. The alternate proposal names it for the Dustline flight crew and the medical personnel represented in the exhibit. My father's jaw tightened. The original proposal has the donor commitments. 3 donors amended their commitments this afternoon. On whose authority? Their own. He looked toward the tables. No one met his eyes quickly enough. Power rarely leaves a person all at once. It drains through small refusals. A donor looks down. An assistant stops taking notes. A board member closes a folder. Helen opened the blue envelope. The board voted before dinner, contingent on provenance confirmation. My father stared at her. You held the vote without me? You recused yourself when you submitted your own name. I founded this campaign, and the campaign will continue. She read the resolution. The gallery would not carry my name. It would not carry my father's. It would be called the Dustline Medical Aviation Gallery, dedicated to aircrews, medics, maintainers and patients whose service had been reduced to classified lines, missing records or unnamed photographs. My father's plaque sat on an easel beside the stage, covered with dark cloth. A staff member approached Helen. She nodded. He lifted the easel and carried it through a side door without uncovering it. My father watched it leave. I waited for my chest to loosen. Nothing changed. The canvas strap dug deeper into my shoulder. Watching someone lose the thing they had used to justify hurting you does not return what they took. It only proves the thing was never worth the price. Lena began rapping the kneeboard. My father turned toward it. Sarah knew. The words were barely audible. I looked at him. He pointed to the handwriting. She wrote that before you deployed. Yes, did she know about the incident? Not the details. But she knew something happened. She heard my voice after. My father's face shifted. She spoke to you? Not directly. I reached into the canvas bag and removed my phone. The voicemail had moved across 3 devices and 2 cloud accounts. I kept copies in places I would never accidentally delete. I had listened to the first 6 seconds many times. Never the rest. My mother's voice began beneath a layer of hospital noise. Evie, sweetheart, they are taking me down soon. Your father says you are probably flying, so do not worry about calling back. My father closed his eyes. The message continued. I know you will come home when you can. The same words she had written on the kneeboard. A nurse spoke in the background. My mother lowered her voice. And whatever kept you away, I know you did not choose it lightly. The recording ended. I had not remembered that final sentence. My thumb hovered above the dark screen. The progress bar had reached a place I had never seen. My father opened his eyes. She told me she was afraid, he said. I know. She asked where you were. I know. I did not know what to tell her. So you told yourself I had chosen not to come. His shoulders lowered. It was the first time I had seen him without posture. She needed you, so did the 11 people on that aircraft. The last word struck the room harder than the others. Mercer looked away. My father flinched. I thought of the 12th person. Staff Sergeant Nolan Price, no relation to Helen. He had a wound the medic could not stop. He remained alive until 6 minutes after landing. We had given him 30 more seconds, then 30 more. Then all the seconds we had. It was not enough. I could not give everyone what they needed that night, I said. I have lived with that every day since. My father's voice fell. I blamed you, yes, for 12 years, yes. He looked around the museum. At Mercer, at Helen, at the tables where people had heard him turn blame into entertainment. I did not know. His words hung between us. My hands remained still on the towel. He had kept the door to that night closed for 12 years. The key had always been a question. Lena placed the kneeboard inside its yellow towel. The museum would like to request a long-term loan, she said. Under the new gallery name. My father looked at me, perhaps expecting generosity to repair the evening. I touched the grain of sand in the stitchage. No. Lena nodded as if she had expected the answer. You may create a reproduction, I said. The audio, citation and serial record can establish the exhibit. The original comes home with me. My father looked at the kneeboard. Why? Because not everything that proves a story belongs behind glass. I folded the towel over the burned edge. The object had entered the museum as a burden. It left as mine, not because it proved I was a pilot. Because I was finally choosing what part of the memory the public was allowed to keep. The gala ended early. No announcement was made. People simply began leaving after Helen closed the formal program. Coats appeared. Conversations dropped into whispers. The musicians near the lobby packed their instruments without playing the final set. Snow had thickened outside. Through the glass entrance, the parking lights blurred into pale circles. I carried the canvas bag over one shoulder. The kneeboard rested inside, wrapped in my mother's yellow towel. Mercer found me near the corridor leading to the staff exit. His wife stood a few steps behind him. I owe you my life, he said. I shook my head. You owe the crew, I know. The line between his brows eased. Then I owe your crew my life, that is closer. His mouth moved into a tired smile. I have spent years telling people I survived because the aircraft commander refused to panic. I never knew who I was talking about. You did not need to. Maybe not, but you deserve to know someone remembered. I looked at his wedding ring. Did your hand heal? He turned it over. The scar beneath the band had faded white. My wife says I kept complaining about the ring more than the broken ribs. She is probably right, she usually is. His wife joined us and touched my arm. Thank you, she said. No speech, no embrace. Just 2 words that had waited 12 years to find the correct person. After they left, Lena handed me a folder containing the preliminary authentication report. The reproduction request will come next week, she said. I will review it, no rush. She glanced toward the main gallery. My father stood alone near my mother's empty chair. You do not owe anyone a conversation tonight, I know. You say that often? I am trying to start believing it. She smiled and returned to the archive. I could have left through the staff exit. My car was closer on that side. Instead, I walked back into the gallery. The catering staff had cleared most of the tables. A half-melted line of ice sat inside the water glass at my father's place. Above him, the suspended rotor blades moved faintly in the ventilation current. He heard my steps and stood. For once, he did not correct my posture, my hair, or the way I carried the bag. I was wrong, he said. He said it without looking toward the donors. My grip on the canvas strap eased, but only by a fraction. I humiliated you. Yes, I used your mother. My hand tightened around the canvas strap. Yes, he looked down. I do not know how to repair that. The younger version of me would have helped him. I would have given him words, a schedule, a small task he could complete so both of us could pretend the larger damage had been addressed. That is what daughters often do for fathers who are more comfortable issuing orders than asking forgiveness. We turn our pain into instructions they can follow. I did not do that. You cannot repair 12 years tonight. He nodded. Snow moved against the windows. Will you tell me what happened? The question came quietly, the right question perhaps. Only 12 years late, not tonight. His face tightened, then relaxed. All right, you do not get the story because you finally asked once. I understand, I do not think you do. He accepted that too. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at the bag. Did Sarah know you kept it? Yes. Why did she write that? She wrote it on everything before I deployed. Lunch bags. Flight manuals. Once on the inside of a boot, he almost smiled. She worried. She trusted me to come back when I could. His eyes closed briefly. I did not. No, the word stayed between us. Not cruel, not softened, true. He reached toward the canvas strap, then stopped before touching it. What happens now? I had spent years wondering what revenge would feel like. In my imagination, it was clean, a door closing, a person finally understanding exactly what they had done. The museum lights reflected across the floor between us. He looked at me as if he could see the outline of the damage, but not its depth. Now I go home, I said, and us, you stop speaking for me. He nodded. You stop using mom to win arguments, another nod. You correct the people you misled, not with a press release about the Carter family. Not by making my service part of your legacy, I will. If you want a relationship with me, you build one without an audience. He looked toward the empty museum. I do not know if I remember how. That is not my job to teach you. His face folded slightly at the edges. He looked old, not defeated. His shoulders no longer held the room. He stood there with both hands empty. I adjusted the bag on my shoulder. Good night, Dad. Good night, Evie. He had not called me Evie all evening. I walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard him sit down again. I did not turn around. Outside, snow collected on the hood of my car. I placed the canvas bag on the passenger seat and removed the yellow towel. Under the parking light, the kneeboard looked smaller than it had inside the museum. The burn mark remained. The 3 black lines remained. My mother's words remained. Come home when you can. I touched the grain of sand in the seam. Then I wrapped the metal again and closed the bag. For years, I thought silence was the most dignified thing I could offer the dead. That night, I understood something different. Silence can preserve a memory. It can also preserve a lie. The difference is whether the people around you are honoring what you cannot say or using it to say whatever benefits them. My father had not lost me because he failed to recognize a military citation. He had lost years with me because he preferred an answer he invented over a question he might not control. Perhaps he would learn to ask. Perhaps I would answer one day. Forgiveness was possible, access was not automatic. I started the engine and waited for the windshield to clear. Across the parking lot, the museum lights dimmed one section at a time. The last light remained on beneath the suspended medevac helicopter. Then it went dark. I drove home with the kneeboard beside me. Not as proof, not as an exhibit, as the one piece of that night I was finally allowed to carry without anyone else deciding what it meant. Share this story with someone whose silence has been mistaken for weakness. The 3 marks had once measured 3 lives running out of time. That night they marked the moment I stopped letting silence preserve someone else's lie.